The conference room was silent except for the sound of my heels on the marble floor as I walked to the head of the table. 23 investors. 7 board members. My presentation deck glowing on 4 separate screens. 3 years of strategy distilled into 40 slides that I had rebuilt from scratch at 2 in the morning because Ethan said the original version lacked confidence. I had been awake for 31 hours. Nobody knew that. I smoothed my jacket, clicked to slide 1, and smiled. Good morning. My name is Amara Cole, and what you're about to see isn't just a pitch. It's proof. The room leaned in. I could feel it, that particular kind of attention that only comes when people sense they are about to witness something worth remembering. I had felt it before. In smaller rooms, with smaller stakes. But this was different. This was the moment we had been building toward for 8 years. I clicked to slide 2. Revenue trajectory. 41% year-over-year growth. I watched eyebrows lift across the table. A woman in a gray blazer at the far end uncapped her pen. Our client retention rate sits at 94%, I said, which in branding is almost unheard of. The reason for that isn't luck. It's architecture. Every system, every client relationship, every creative framework in this company was designed to hold. And I'm going to show you exactly how it was designed and exactly where we're taking it next. I clicked forward. The room was mine. And then the door opened. Ethan walked in. He wasn't supposed to be in this meeting. He was supposed to be at the stakeholder pre-briefing downstairs, the one I had personally scheduled so he would be out of this room while I presented. He had agreed. He had nodded, kissed me on the cheek that morning, and said, "You've got this, babe." He walked slowly. Deliberately. The way men walk when they want a room to notice them. He stopped beside me. I kept my smile. "Ethan, I'm mid-presentation, I know." He looked at the investors. Not at me. At them. As if I were a piece of furniture he was moving past. He straightened his jacket. He put both hands on the back of my presentation chair. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption. Ethan, you're done here, Amara." His voice was calm. Almost gentle. The way you speak to someone you want to appear reasonable in front of. Security will escort you out. The room went completely still. I heard my own heartbeat. I looked at him. Really looked at him. His jaw was set. His eyes were already moving away from me, back to the investors, like I had already left. Like I was already gone. "Excuse me?" My voice came out quieter than I intended. "This is a board decision," he said, still not fully looking at me. "We can discuss it later. Right now, I need you to, this is my presentation, Ethan." It was. He finally looked at me then. And what I saw in his eyes wasn't anger. It wasn't even cruelty. It was something worse. It was finality. Not anymore. 2 security guards appeared at the door. They had been waiting. They had been waiting right outside the door before he even walked in. That's when I understood. The room was a blur of non-eye contact. 23 investors suddenly fascinated by their notepads, their phones, the table surface. 7 board members. Not one of them said a word. Not one. Except Vanessa. Vanessa Reed, board advisor, sat at the far left corner with her hands folded neatly in front of her and a smile so small it could almost be mistaken for nothing. Almost. I had learned to read Vanessa's face the way you learn to read weather, not because she told you anything, but because the smallest signal meant the biggest storm. She was not surprised. None of this surprised her. And in the 4 seconds it took me to understand that, as the security guard stepped forward and the room continued its performance of polite deafness, I felt the floor shift under me. He didn't just embarrass me. He planned this. If you've ever been blindsided by someone you trusted, someone you built your entire world beside, hit like right now. Because I need you to understand where I was standing in that moment. And I need you to stay with me. Because this story gets so much worse before it gets better. I want to take you back. Because none of this makes sense without the beginning. 8 years earlier, Ethan Cole and I were working out of a converted spare bedroom in a 2-bedroom apartment in Atlanta, splitting one laptop between us because mine had died and we couldn't afford to replace it that month. We had 3 clients. One of them was Ethan's cousin's restaurant. Another was a woman who sold handmade candles on Etsy and wanted a brand refresh, which meant she had a $30 budget and very big dreams. We were happy. That's the part that makes everything harder. We were genuinely, fully happy. I had met Ethan at a design conference when I was 26. He was presenting, not on design, but on the business of creative agencies, which in retrospect was always his true interest. He wasn't creative, not in the technical sense. He couldn't kern type or select a color palette or write a brand narrative to save his life. But he could walk into a room full of strangers and within 20 minutes make them feel like he was the most important person they'd ever met. He had a gift for belonging. For making people want to give him things. I had the opposite gift. I could see the architecture of a thing. The invisible structure underneath a company's surface, what they were really selling, who they were really speaking to, why their customers actually stayed or left. I could take that apart and rebuild it in a way that felt both inevitable and new. We were, on paper, a perfect professional pairing. We fell in love somewhere between the 3rd client pitch and the first time we stayed up until 4 in the morning rebuilding a brand strategy because I had a feeling the original angle was wrong. Ethan had looked at me across the laptop screen at some point around 2:30 in the morning and said, "You know you're the smartest person I've ever been in a room with?" I had laughed. I didn't argue. That was a mistake I would repeat for years. Cole Creative launched officially when I was 27. I chose the name. I designed the logo. I wrote every word of our original positioning deck. Ethan pitched us to his network, and his network was genuinely impressive. Former classmates, industry contacts, a family friend who happened to sit on the board of a mid-size retail brand. Within 18 months we had 17 clients and had moved into actual office space. By year 3 we had a team of 12. By year 5 we had a team of 40 and a client roster that included 3 publicly traded companies. I want you to pay attention to what I'm about to say, because it matters later. In those 5 years, I made every major creative and strategic decision. Every one. The account directors reported to me. The creative team reported to me. Our positioning in the market, the niche we owned, the reputation we built, that came from me. From frameworks I developed, from thinking I had done, from relationships I had maintained because I understood that client trust is a long game built on specificity and care. Ethan ran the front end. He attended the events. He handled the investor relationships. He did the handshakes and the dinners and the golf. He was charming in every room I prepared him to walk into. And I prepared every room. I wrote his talking points. I briefed him before every major meeting. I told him what each client actually needed to hear, what questions they were likely to ask, what concerns sat just under the surface of their professional courtesy. He would go in, deliver it, and come back glowing. "They love us," he'd say. And I'd nod. Because I knew. I knew they loved the strategy one had handed him like a script. Pay attention to the small details in this part, I want to tell you. Because they matter later. The first time I noticed the shift, I almost talked myself out of it. We were at an industry dinner. One of those events where everyone is performing their own success over overpriced salmon. A journalist from a trade publication approached our table and asked Ethan about our repositioning of a major retail client, A project I had spent 4 months developing. It was my most complex strategic work to that point. A full brand architecture overhaul. Ethan talked about it for 6 minutes without mentioning my name once. I watched him. He wasn't lying, exactly. He was just narrating. As if it were a story he'd observed rather than one I had written. And when the journalist finally looked at me and said, "And what's your role at Cole Creative?" Ethan answered before I could. "Amara keeps the trains running," he said warmly. He touched my hand. He smiled. "She's the heartbeat of our operations." I smiled back. The journalist wrote about Ethan. I told myself it didn't matter. I was never in it for the credit. I was in it for the work, for the building of the thing, for the satisfaction of watching a strategy succeed. I genuinely believed that. But a version of me that I wasn't listening to noticed the pattern. And noted it quietly. And waited. Vanessa Reed joined our advisory board at the end of year 6. Ethan introduced her as a game changer at a team meeting, the kind of language he used when he was excited about something he didn't fully understand yet. Vanessa was 42, impeccably dressed, and had an impressive resume, board advisor to several growing companies, a background in private equity, a network that ran deep into institutional investment circles. She shook my hand and said, "I've heard so much about your husband's vision for this company." Not our vision. His vision. I filed it. There was one document I signed back then that I didn't question at the time, I need to tell you. That mistake almost cost me everything. 14 months before the boardroom moment, Ethan had presented me with a corporate restructuring proposal. He framed it as a tax optimization strategy, something his new financial advisor, who turned out to be someone Vanessa had introduced him to, had recommended. It involved creating a new holding structure and reissuing shares in a slightly different configuration. "It's just cleaner this way," Ethan said. "Better for when we eventually go public." I was in the middle of a brutal project cycle. We had just won a major new account and I was running on adrenaline and too much coffee. I read through the document, but not as carefully as I should have. The share percentages looked roughly the same. The language around operational control was buried in section 4.2 of a 40-page legal document. I signed it. I thought we were building an empire together. I didn't realize I was being written out of it. The security guards didn't touch me. I want to be clear about that. They stood at the door and they waited, and I chose to walk toward them because the alternative, making a scene, arguing, fighting in front of 23 investors while Ethan watched with that rehearsed calm, would have been exactly what he wanted. I understood that much even in that first moment of shock. I walked out of my own conference room. I rode the elevator down alone. My key card stopped working at the main entrance when I tried to re-enter from the lobby, which told me the access had been revoked in real time, not after I left, but during the meeting, probably while Ethan was walking through the door. Someone had timed it. Someone had been watching. I stood on the sidewalk outside the building that housed the company I had co-founded, and I called Jordan. Jordan Blake, 33, senior designer, had been with Cole Creative for 5 years. He was quiet in the way deeply observant people tend to be. You would forget he was in the room and then later realize he had noticed everything. He was the only person in that office I trusted completely, partly because he had never once tried to manage my perception of him. He picked up on the first ring. "I already know," he said. "What do you know?" "That you're outside. That your card's been cut. That they're in there right now telling people you resigned for personal reasons." A pause. "Amara, this was organized. The IT lockout was staged. I watched them prep it yesterday and I didn't understand what I was seeing until right now." I sat down on a bench across the street. "Don't call me from that number again," I said. "Use your personal phone." "And Jordan, I know. Another pause. I'm not going anywhere. But you need to be careful. I went home. Ethan was already there. That was the first thing that struck me as wrong. He had been in that meeting not 20 minutes ago, and he was somehow already home, jacket hung, making coffee, as if nothing in the world had happened at all. As if the day were perfectly ordinary. "Hey," he said. "How are you home right now?" "I left the meeting early. Vanessa's handling the clothes." He poured coffee into a mug. My mug, the one with the chipped handle that I had kept for 3 years because I was sentimental about ridiculous things. He poured it into my mug without thinking and handed it to me. "You okay?" I stared at him. "Am I okay?" I repeated. I know it was a hard moment. He leaned against the kitchen counter. His face was composed. Concerned, even. He had the face of someone delivering difficult news with compassion. But it was the right call, Amara. The board has been worried. Honestly, and I say this because I love you, you've been overwhelmed lately. The pressure, the pace. It's been showing. Don't. I'm not attacking you, you had me escorted out of my own presentation, I said. By security. In front of investors. Don't stand here and tell me it was concern. It was a business decision. His voice went flatter. The compassion performance dropped exactly 1 degree. And it was a board decision, not just mine. You've been making errors recently. The Halverson account miscommunication. The timeline collapse on Meridian. People have noticed. I managed both of those situations. You created both of those situations. He set his coffee down. Amara, this isn't an attack. You built something real here. But the company is in a growth phase now and it needs different energy at the front. You can still be involved. I said the word like it was in a language I was translating in real time. This is my company, Ethan. It's our company. The correction was instant and automatic. And right now the company needs stability. The access restrictions are temporary. The board just wants a period of recalibration. I looked at him for a long moment. And I stopped arguing. Not because I agreed. Not because I was backing down. But because something had just shifted inside me, very quietly, very completely, and I understood that arguing in this kitchen with this man who had clearly rehearsed this conversation was going to cost me something I could not afford to spend. I picked up my coffee. I went to the bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed and I opened my personal laptop. Comment planned right now if you already understand that nothing about that kitchen conversation was accidental. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched my own disappearance. It happened in stages, the way all deliberate things do when someone wants them to look accidental. First, the internal communications. Emails that I should have been copied on, wasn't. Meeting invitations that vanished from my calendar. When I reached out to account directors I had managed for years, the responses were polite and brief and carefully said nothing. Someone had spoken to them. I could feel the shape of the instruction in the way they wrote, warm enough to avoid suspicion, closed enough to stop information from passing through. Then, the public narrative. A trade publication ran a brief item about leadership changes at Cole Creative. It described Ethan as spearheading a new strategic direction. It described me as having stepped back from day-to-day operations to focus on new ventures. I had not been interviewed. I had not been contacted. Someone had fed them that line word for word. Vanessa stepped into the spotlight so smoothly it was almost artistic. She began appearing in industry panels, being quoted in press coverage of the company, her name linked to Cole Creative's exciting new chapter. She was good at this, at filling the space that someone else had been removed from so completely that you almost couldn't see the seam. At home, Ethan continued the performance. That's the word I kept coming back to. Performance. Because that's what it was. I could see it now with the clarity that only comes when you stop hoping you're wrong. Every conversation was calibrated. Every response was measured. He knew exactly where the edges of my frustration were, and he worked along them with the precision of someone who had been practicing. "You seem distant," he said one evening. "I'm processing. I think you should talk to someone. Professionally, I mean. Dr. Wren has availability. I don't need a therapist, Ethan." "I didn't say you did. I said it might help." He tilted his head. That particular tilt, concerned, reasonable, generous. "You've been through something difficult. There's no shame in needing support." I understood what he was doing. I understood it with every cell in my body. He was constructing a narrative in real time, the same way you build a case, small evidence layered on small evidence. She was erratic. She was overwhelmed. She needed professional help. So that when the larger story was told, there would be a trail of context. Witnesses to her instability. A husband who had tried to help. I looked at him very steadily. "You're right," I said. "I'll look into it." I didn't look into it. What I did instead was call Marcus Webb. Marcus had been my attorney before he became anyone else's anything. We had worked together in the early years of the company on contract structures, and then life had gotten busy and I had moved to the firm Ethan preferred and Marcus had faded into the background. I called his personal cell number from a phone I had bought with cash at a drugstore 2 days after the boardroom incident. "Amara." His voice was careful. "I heard something happened. I need you to look at some documents," I said. "And I need you to be someone I contacted for entirely unrelated reasons if anyone asks." A pause. "What am I looking at?" "A restructuring agreement. Dated 14 months ago. And the original incorporation documents from 8 years ago." Another pause. "Longer." "Send them to my personal email," he said. "Not the firm." I stayed in that strategic quiet for the next several weeks. I stopped reacting. I stopped challenging Ethan. I moved through the apartment like someone who had accepted a reality, and I watched him relax incrementally, the way a person does when they believe a threat has been managed. People underestimate quiet women. They see the quiet and they think defeat. They should know better. But they never do. Subscribe right now if you want to know what I was actually doing during that silence. Because it looked like nothing. It was everything. Marcus called me 3 days after I sent the documents. "You've been deluded," he said. I was sitting in my car in the parking garage of a shopping center 12 minutes from our house. I had started having important conversations in my car because it was the only genuinely private space I had access to. "How much?" "The restructuring dropped your voting shares significantly. You retained equity on paper, but operational and voting control shifted to a new holding structure. The holding structure is controlled by a management board." He paused. "Ethan is listed as majority controller of that board. Is that legal?" "The document you signed makes it arguably legal. You agreed to the restructuring. The question is whether you were given full material disclosure of what you were agreeing to, and from what I can see in these terms, the answer to that question is no." Another pause. "Amara, whoever structured this knew what they were doing. This wasn't a financial advisor. This was someone with very specific corporate law experience." "Vanessa. What do I have?" I asked. "Potentially a great deal," Marcus said carefully. "But I need more. I need the financial records, the operating agreements, any communications around the restructuring proposal. And I need to understand where the company's cash is flowing right now." That's where Jordan came in. Jordan and I had been meeting in person, at a coffee shop 40 minutes from the office, using a scheduling system that looked like two friends catching up. He came with his personal laptop and he was meticulous and he never overstated anything. "They're moving money," he said at our third meeting. He turned his screen to face me. "These are the vendor payments from the last 6 weeks. Look at this entity here, Vertex Strategic Consulting. I've been tracking payments to them. $83,000 over 6 weeks. I looked up the registration. It's a Delaware LLC, filed 8 months ago. Who's behind it? The registered agent is a law firm. I can't get further than that through public records." He looked at me. "But look at the timing. It lines up perfectly with Vanessa joining the board." I looked at the numbers. I looked at the dates. I felt something settle in my chest, not anger, not yet. Something colder and more useful. "What else?" "They're in early conversations with 3 private equity firms." He hesitated. "And there's a pitch deck circulating. I haven't seen the full version, but I've seen references to it in internal emails. It's for a public offering." "IPO." "Yes." He met my eyes. "And, Amara," he paused again, and this pause was different from the others. This one had weight in it. The concept they're pitching. The market positioning angle. The framework. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "They're not just taking my company. They're rewriting my story. If you like stories about women who stop reacting and start calculating, hit like right now. Because what happened next is the part they never thought I would find out." I found out about the mental breakdown narrative on a Tuesday. One of our original clients, a woman named Claire who ran a skincare brand that we had helped scale from regional to national in year 3, called my personal number. She was hesitant on the phone, the way people are when they're about to tell you something you don't want to hear but need to. "I had a lunch with Ethan last week," she said. "I thought you'd want to know what he said." "Tell me." He said you'd been struggling for a while. That the pressure of the company's growth had been too much. That you'd had some kind of episode." She paused. "Amara, he described it like you'd had a breakdown. He was very sympathetic about it. Which somehow made it worse. I was in my car again. The parking garage again. I had started thinking of it as my office." "Did you believe him?" I asked. A long pause. "No," she said quietly. "I've known you for 6 years. I know what you built. And I know what he looked like when he talked about it. He looked relieved. That's not how a husband talks about a wife he's worried about. That's how someone looks when a problem has been handled." I gripped the steering wheel. "Claire," I said, "I'm going to need a favor." "I know," she said. "Why do you think I called?" That phone call broke something open in me. Not the grief part. The grief had already done what it was going to do in that parking garage on the first night, when I had sat alone for 2 hours in the dark and let myself understand the full size of what had happened. This was different. This was the moment that burned away everything that was left of hoping this was somehow less calculated than it appeared. He was telling investors I had a mental breakdown. He was pitching my concept as his vision. He was planning to take this company public on the foundation of work I had built, using a story he had rewritten. Without me in it. I am not a person who uses the word war lightly. I don't think most conflicts deserve the drama of that word. But I want you to understand what shifted in me in that parking garage on that Tuesday. Something that had been searching for the right response since the boardroom moment, something that had been patient, gathering, observing, finally found its shape. I stopped thinking about fixing things. I started planning the end. Comment no mercy if you think she should go all the way. The gala was announced 6 weeks later. Cole Creative Investor Night, a black tie event at one of Atlanta's most prominent venues, framed as a celebration of the company's 8th anniversary and a preview of its next phase of growth. The invitation list included every major name in the local and regional investment community. Media would be present. It was, in every sense, a coming-out party for the new version of Cole Creative, the version without me, the version built on my bones, being introduced to the world as something Ethan had made. I received an invitation. Of course I did. My absence would have raised questions. My presence, quiet and gracious and appearing to have moved on, would confirm the story he had told. I RSVP'd yes. Ethan seemed genuinely pleased when I told him. He looked at me across the kitchen with something that might have been relief, might have been satisfaction, and said, "I think this is healthy, Amara. Starting to reconnect. It'll be good for you to see people." "I think you're right," I said. I smiled at him. What he didn't know, what no one in that apartment knew, and what no one in that office knew, and what Vanessa Reed with all her strategic expertise did not know, was that by the time I said yes to that invitation, the following things were already in motion. Marcus had filed a formal legal challenge to the restructuring agreement, based on material misrepresentation and breach of fiduciary duty. It was sealed, pending the right moment to surface. A forensic accountant Marcus had brought in had traced the Vertex strategic consulting payments and found what was behind the LLC registration. It connected to a holding company with ties to Vanessa's private equity history, a conflict of interest so direct it was almost offensive in its lack of subtlety. Claire had connected me quietly with 2 other major clients who had their own concerns about the company's direction under its new leadership. They were willing to speak. They were willing to sign statements. Jordan had forwarded me, from a personal device, through a system Marcus had set up, internal emails referencing the IPO pitch deck. Emails that referenced the origin of the core concept. Emails that used language that directly contradicted the story being told publicly about who had created the framework being pitched to private equity. And I had recordings. I want to be careful about how I say this, because I was careful about how I did this. Georgia is a one-party consent state for recorded communications. I had confirmed this with Marcus before I began. Every conversation I had with Ethan at home in those final weeks, the ones where he was calm and rehearsed and laying out his reasoning in that particular way he had, I recorded on a device in my jacket pocket. I had learned, watching him, that he was most revealing when he believed he was being generous. When he thought he was explaining things to someone who had already accepted the outcome, he became specific. Specific about decisions. Specific about timelines. Specific about who had been involved in what. He had given me more than he realized. Don't skip what happens next. Don't. This is where everything explodes. The gala venue was extraordinary. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a room full of Atlanta's financial and business elite in their finest clothes, lighting designed to make everything look like the future. There were photographers from 3 publications. There was a stage with a podium and 2 enormous screens. On either side. I arrived alone. I wore a dress I had bought specifically for this evening, deep burgundy, architectural in its structure, the kind of dress that was noticeable without trying to be. I had my hair up. I wore my grandmother's earrings, small gold things that she had worn every important day of her life, because I needed something of her steadiness in my ears. Jordan was already inside. He caught my eye from across the room and gave me the smallest nod. Marcus was not in the room. He was 20 minutes away, with documents ready. Claire was in the room. She saw me and came to kiss my cheek and murmur, "I'm here." I circulated. I accepted a glass of sparkling water. I spoke to people I recognized, smiled at people I didn't, and I watched Ethan work the room from a careful distance. He was in his element, relaxed, radiant, that particular brand of confidence that looks like warmth but is actually armor. Vanessa stood near the edge of the stage area, speaking with two men I recognized as being from one of the private equity firms Jordan had identified. She saw me. Something moved across her face, surprise, quickly managed. She smiled. I smiled back. At 8:45, Ethan took the stage. The room quieted with the ease of a room that has been waiting for this moment. 8 years ago, he said, I had a vision. I set my glass down very carefully on the nearest table. 8 years ago, I saw a gap in the branding industry, a failure to connect strategic thinking with authentic creative execution. I built Cole Creative on the belief that those two things weren't opposites. That the best creative work is the most strategic work. He paused for effect. He was good at pauses. Tonight, we're not just celebrating 8 years. We're announcing the next chapter. The screens behind him lit up with the deck. My deck. My framework. My language. My architecture, the specific positioning model I had developed over 18 months, that I had documented in detail in internal strategy files that I had authored and dated and built incrementally over years of work. On the screen, in a typeface I had not chosen, attributed to a vision I had not been given credit for. I walked toward the stage. Someone near me noticed and stepped slightly aside, and then someone else did, and I was moving through the crowd and the crowd was parting, not because they knew what was happening, but because there is something in the way a person moves when they have made a final, irreversible decision that the body registers before the mind does. I stepped onto the stage. Ethan turned. For one full second, his face showed me something real, shock, and underneath the shock, fear. Just for a second. Then the performance came back up. Amara, I'm sorry to interrupt, I said into the microphone. My voice came out clear and even, and I was grateful to my own body for that. I'll be brief. The room was frozen. My name is Amara Cole. I am the co-founder of this company. I developed the strategic framework you just saw presented as my husband's vision. I can document that in detail, and tonight, I'm going to. Ethan's hand closed around my arm. Amara, this is not, don't. I said it quietly. Just to him. Don't. He let go. Jordan, from somewhere near the AV station, made the connection I had asked him to make. The screens changed. The original documents came up first, the incorporation papers, 8 years old, both our names. Then the internal strategy files, time-stamped and authored. Then the financial records, the Vertex payments, the connected LLC, Vanessa's conflict of interest laid out in clean, readable terms. Then the emails about the IPO pitch, with the lines about the framework's origin highlighted. Then the audio. Ethan's voice filled the room. From a conversation 2 weeks earlier. In our kitchen. The framework is what's going to sell this to investors, his voice said, clear and calm. They've never seen a positioning model structured this way. Vanessa says if we get ahead of any questions about its origin, we can frame the whole thing as an evolution of my original thinking. Silence. His voice again, Amara created the methodology, obviously. But she's not going to be in a position to contest that framing. Not without it looking like he had stopped himself in the recording. He hadn't finished the sentence. He didn't need to. I looked at the room. 23 investors, now joined by a room full of additional faces, all of them still, all of them staring. I looked at Vanessa. She had gone the particular color of someone who has calculated their exit and found it blocked. I looked at Ethan. He was standing behind me on his own stage and he was looking at the screens with the expression of someone watching a building collapse, the specific paralysis of a person who built something on a foundation they believed was removed and has just discovered it wasn't. You forgot one thing, I said. I built this. I paused. This company was never yours, I said. You just learned how to stand in front of it. If that moment gave you chills, hit like right now and subscribe. Because the night wasn't over yet. What happened in the next 40 minutes I can describe, but I want you to understand that I wasn't watching it the way you might imagine, with triumph, or satisfaction, or the clean release of a story reaching its conclusion. I was watching it the way you watch something you've been bracing for, with relief that the thing you feared has finally happened and the waiting is done. The first investor to move was a woman named Diane Faust, a name people in Atlanta's financial world recognize. She stood up, said something quietly to the man beside her, and walked to find her coat. When Diane Faust walks out of a room, others notice. Others follow. The private equity representatives I had identified, the ones Vanessa had been speaking with before the presentation, were on their phones within minutes. I watched one of them show his screen to the other. They did not look at Ethan. They walked out together. The board members who had sat in that glass conference room 8 weeks ago and watched security escorts me out without a word, I watched them watching the screens, watching the investors leave, watching Ethan standing on his own stage like a man whose ground has just collapsed under him. Vanessa left without speaking to anyone. I saw her move toward the exit, smooth and quick, her face blank with a particular kind of blankness that is not calm but is the mask of someone processing a catastrophic loss of position. She did not look at me. Ethan stepped off the stage. He walked toward me. His voice, when he finally spoke, was very low. The performance had dropped entirely now. This was the first fully real conversation we had had and I didn't know how long. "You just destroyed everything," he said. "No," I said. "You did. The night you had security walk me out of my own presentation. Amara, I loved this company." My voice stayed steady. I needed it to stay steady for this part. I loved what we built. And I loved you, Ethan. I need you to understand that I am not someone who did any of this lightly. Not one single thing. He stared at me. I saw something in his face that might have been the beginning of understanding, or might have been grief, or might have been both. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now Marcus files," I said. "And the board gets the full picture. And what happens to the company depends on decisions that are no longer just yours to make." I picked up my clutch from the table where I had left it. "Good night, Ethan." I walked out of that room on my own 2 feet. I want to tell you what happened in the weeks that followed, because the aftermath is not usually the part of these stories that gets examined carefully, and it deserves to be. The legal proceedings were neither fast nor simple. They never are. The challenge to the restructuring agreement moved through proper channels, with Marcus building a case around material misrepresentation and breach of fiduciary duty. Ethan hired one of Atlanta's most aggressive corporate defense firms. There were depositions and document requests and months of procedural complexity that looked nothing like the clean resolution of a good story. But here is what is also true: 2 of the 3 private equity firms withdrew from IPO discussions within a week of the gala. The third requested a comprehensive audit before any further conversations. That audit is what revealed the full scope of the Vertex payments, not just the amount, but what they had been paying for, which turned out to be market intelligence on Cole Creative's client relationships, gathered through a consulting arrangement that represented a direct conflict of interest given Vanessa's board position. The board convened an emergency session. I was not in that session. But Jordan was, in his capacity as a witness, and he told me afterward that there was a moment when the board chair asked Ethan directly whether he had known about Vanessa's financial relationship with the Vertex entity. Ethan had been quiet for a very long time before answering. Vanessa resigned from the board by end of that week. She issued a statement about pursuing other interests. The statement was a masterpiece of saying nothing, and nobody was fooled, and nobody said so publicly because that is how these things tend to work. Ethan's reputation, built so carefully over so many years in so many rooms, did not collapse overnight. These things rarely do. But it began to unravel at the edges, the way a fabric does when the wrong thread is pulled. People talked. People in the industry have long memories and longer networks, and the story of that gala evening circulated in the way things do when they are specific and documented and witnessed by enough people that it can't be managed into a different shape. He stopped being invited to things he had previously been central to. As for our marriage, I know that is what some of you want to know about, and I'll tell you this, by the time I walked into that gala, I had already grieved what our marriage had been and made my peace with what it was. The legal separation was handled privately, without drama, because the drama had already happened and I had no appetite for more. Ethan and I did not have a final conversation that resolved anything. We did not have the confrontation where he admitted everything and asked forgiveness and I made a grand decision about whether to grant it. That is the version of this story that exists in fiction. The real version is more ordinary, paperwork and attorneys and the slow, administrative work of disassembling a life that had been built to look unified. What I can tell you is this: one evening, about 2 months after the gala, I was going through old files, boxes of documents that I had moved into storage and was slowly sorting through. I found a notebook from year 2 of the company. My handwriting, from a time when I was excited about everything and afraid of nothing, filling every page with ideas. Strategy frameworks. Brand positioning models. The earliest versions of the thinking that would eventually become the methodology being pitched to investors 8 years later. I sat with that notebook for a long time. Then I put it in my bag and I went to meet Jordan. 4 months after the gala, we registered a new entity. We spent 2 weeks arguing about the name, which is how I knew we were going to be fine. Jordan wanted something that gestured toward future thinking. I wanted something grounded. We went back and forth across a table at the coffee shop that had become our unofficial headquarters, crossing things out and suggesting alternatives, and at some point Jordan threw his pen down and laughed and said, "You know what? You should just name it after yourself. Just Amara. Clean. Unmistakable." I thought about it for a longer moment than I expected to. "Cole," I said finally. Just Cole. Same name, cleaner version. Jordan nodded slowly. That works. That works, I agreed. Cole's strategy launched without a press release or an event. Or any of the fanfare that Ethan would have insisted on. We sent personal notes to a select list of clients and former clients. We put up a website that was deliberately simple, a philosophy statement, a contact form, the names of the people behind it. Nothing performative. Claire was our first client. By month 2, we had 6. By month 4, we had 14, and 3 of them had come directly from Cole Creative, accounts that Ethan had been managing under the new structure and that had, quietly and without drama, decided to follow the work rather than the name on the door. Jordan runs the creative team. I run the strategy and the client relationships. We have 8 people. We have a real office, not a converted spare bedroom. Every person in that office knows exactly who makes what decisions and why. Nobody takes credit for anyone else's thinking. I made that a condition of employment, written into our internal operating agreement, partly as principle and partly as something I needed to see in writing to feel fully safe again. You build for long enough in someone else's shadow, you forget what your own light looks like. That's the thing Ethan didn't understand, or maybe understood too well and counted on. He thought that by removing me from the structure, he removed me from the story. He thought ownership was about access and title and the name on the door. He didn't understand that the work was mine because the thinking was mine. You can lock out an email address. You cannot lock out a mind. I think about the morning of the boardroom presentation sometimes. The 31 hours without sleep. The rebuilt deck. The way the room leaned forward when I started speaking. I think about the 4 seconds between understanding that Vanessa wasn't surprised and the security guard stepping forward. I think about what I should have known sooner, seen sooner, questioned sooner. There are versions of this story where I catch the restructuring document before I sign it. Where I notice the credit-taking pattern early enough to name it. Where I build different legal protections into the foundation from the start. I have been through all those versions in my own mind many times. What I always come back to is this: I was not wrong to trust. I was not naive to believe in the partnership. Loving someone, building something with them, believing that the thing you are creating together is genuinely shared, that is not a character flaw. That is a human decision, and it deserved better than what it got. The mistake was not in the loving. The mistake was in going quiet when the small things started to shift, when the credits started to disappear, when the documents needed more careful reading than I gave them. I will not make that kind of quiet again. There is a difference between the quiet of someone who has accepted defeat and the quiet of someone who is watching, gathering, and planning. I spent the early part of this story in the wrong kind of quiet. I have learned to live in the right kind. Someone asked me recently what I would say to Ethan if I had one conversation with no legal implications and no strategic considerations, just the truth. I thought about it for a while. I think I would say, you were never the lesser half of what we were. You had real gifts and you used them genuinely in the beginning. I don't know when that changed. I don't know whether Vanessa introduced the idea of the restructuring to you or whether the idea was already there waiting for the right person to help you execute it. I don't know how much of what happened was ambition and how much was fear that without me you were less than you appeared, fear that the gap between the face and the reality would eventually become visible. But I want you to know that you didn't have to be afraid of that. The face and the reality were always going to be enough. We were enough. What we built together was real. You chose to take it apart and put your name on the pieces. And that is the thing I will never fully understand. I don't know if I'll ever say that to him. I don't know if the opportunity will come or if I would take it if it did. Some truths are enough to carry inside you without needing to deliver them. What I know is this: he thought he fired me. He thought he built the walls and locked the doors and rewrote the story and left me on the outside of something I had made. What he actually did was remove himself from my way. He took the structure I had built and put his name on it, and in doing so, he freed me from the structure entirely. He freed me to build the next thing, cleaner, clearer, fully mine, with my name on every decision and my thinking on every page and not one document that I have not read in full with a lawyer present. Cole's strategy is 4 months old. We are already growing faster than Cole Creative grew in its first 2 years. Some of that is experience. Some of it is the clients who followed the work. Some of it is Jordan, who is a better partner than I have words for. And some of it, I'll be honest, some of it is the particular clarity that comes from having lost something and rebuilt it on ground you trust completely because you tested it yourself. There is a quality to work done in that clarity that I cannot fully explain but that I believe clients feel. They feel that this is a place where the thinking is real. Because it is. He thought he took everything from me. All he really did was remove himself from my way. If you made it to the end of this story, you already know what I know, that silence isn't weakness. That the most dangerous thing a woman can do is stop arguing and start watching. That the trail someone leaves when they believe you're not looking is the most honest thing they will ever show you. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Hit like if Amara's story hit something true in you. And tell me in the comments, would you have exposed him publicly, or would you have handled it a different way?